You're listening to 4CRB's interviews and talkback series.
Welcome to the microphone. Welcome to the studio, Supreme Court Judge David Ashton Lewis.
Well, as always, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be in the studio, and I'm pleased that you have indicated to me that we have had really positive feedback, and my thoughts when you suggested that we do the three great Greek philosophers.
We were going to do the foundations of democracy, but it is the three great philosophers who framed that. They framed it, didn't they?
They did. I think that's a tremendous way to say it, because I had real doubts that people, because it's not taught anymore, and even people my age were not taught it. And so I thought, people will ring in and say, these subjects are boring, can we do something else?
But it's one of those things that we find here at 4CRB. It's a positive place. We get history here. Where else do we get history nowadays? Well, you know what? That's a great thing to stand behind.
Well, you're right. And so far the feedback, and today we're going to do Plato, and we touched on Plato last week, didn't we?
We did.
I seem to remember.
So we've done Aristotle. We virtually dedicated an entire show to epistemology.
And now 2 weeks to Plato, and then we'll get on to Socrates next week, and it'll probably run into 2 shows. But I thought as we're starting, I'll just quickly recap on epistemology, because that is what all of them relied on in one form or another. Now, you'll recall last week, listener, that epistemology is a branch of philosophy that is concerned with the nature, the origin, and the limits of human knowledge. Often it is referred to as the theory of knowledge, which, by that name, it investigates what it means to know something and how we acquire knowledge and how we justify our beliefs. To better understand this field of study, it helps, as we have done, to look at the core components of epistemology, and that is the question, what is knowledge? And in that, we've explored the relationship between truth, belief, and justification. Secondly, how do we acquire it? We've looked at evaluating the sources of knowledge, such as reason, or what is known today as rationalism, sensory experience, which is empiricism, and you, in studying, being a man of science, you set up hypotheses, and they were tested against empirical evidence, and then testimony and intuition. Now, intuition can be very helpful in human life. It can also be very dangerous. It can lead to some of the disgraceful beliefs of National Socialism. So and then we looked at what are its limits, and we asked if there are some things we can never know or prove. And of course, the main one of that is we can never know God. We can never prove God. We can only believe in God. Remember, faith is the essence of things unseen and the substance of things hoped for. And even Jesus said, it's by a man's faith you shall know him being God.
Isn't that interesting? And we then moved on to weighing the difference between truth and belief.
Yes.
And that was a very interesting conversation.
Well, and the last one of those 4 epistemological ingredients are, how do we defeat skepticism? Now, that was addressing the philosophical stance that genuine knowledge, and here's a good one, is unattainable. Because think of something in the material world that was known 2,000 years ago and has not changed. I mean, we in the late 1700s and the early 1800s, it was believed in medical practice that there were humours in the blood. And so people would go along to their local GP to be bled once a month.
Oh, yes,
Remember?
or be prescribed a good dose of leeches.
Yes. Well, funnily enough, they still use leeches in some modern surgery today. So this is the challenge of knowledge. And the whole idea of epistemology is to deal with these 4 topics. So all of them dealt with it. So let us get into Plato.
All right. Well, I'm going to ask you straight away. Give us a brief history of the man himself.
Well, he was brilliant. I mean, he was living around about 420, 425 BC, and he had a school in Athens, a school of learning, and it was basically a school of empiricism. And he was following the epistemological scope to how do we know anything? How can we know anything? Now, when you think Greece, Athens, in 420 BC, these type of questions were asked not just by him, but people would come along to hear him speak. Now, they obviously walked away from him thinking, golly, it's amazing, or that's rubbish, I don't believe in it, whatever. But they came along, and in many ways, I always saw it as it was the Greek version of going to the Colosseum on a Saturday night under the Romans to see a couple of people killed and eaten by lions. The Greeks had a much more gentle way. Come along on Saturday night and learn. Learn how to use your brain and your mind, the mind being abstract. You can't see it, but yet it plays such an important role.
I often go back and in reading about these people, think to myself, how did they come up with such lofty thoughts, definitions, measuring sticks, for want of a better term? And I often come back to looking at the time, there were so many less distractions. There wasn't a television set, there wasn't a radio, there wasn't the internet, there wasn't social media. All you had was communication and thought.
And you only really knew people that lived no more than about 5 miles from you.
Sure.
And so that was your world. Now, Greece was regularly attacked by other Greek states, but also, the Persians tried to destroy Greece and they failed.
All right, Plato's contributions.
Yeah, Plato's contribution. Okay. Plato looked at 4 areas. Again, he looked at the theory of forms, knowledge and truth, not your truth, but material, observable, empirical truth that no one could argue and say, well, that's not the truth. And we've got these battles going on today with the definition of gender, male, female. That to an ancient Greek would have been, oh, go away. It's quite true. There are 2 genders, male and female.
Yes.
I'm not interested in any social construct or any theory. You've got to look at the empirical evidence. There are men and there are women.
The other component is a different discussion.
Yeah, it's
and that's
a social construct.
And that's the best way to look at it
is.
Because we need to come back to our fundamentals. We can examine our fundamentals and go, are we basing our opinions, our thought processes, the rest of our society on
observable fact?
Correct.
Well, look, I have been asked, and I'm not hesitant to say, by extremely educated people, David, how many genders are there? And I've said there are 2, and those 2 are male and female. And I've had them come back and say, well, that's rather stiff, isn't it? Because there are movements within that. And I'd say, well, there are movements. There is this question being raised today, but how many observable of those 70? I have one view, there are 72 genders. And I said, all right, have you observed them? No, what they've done is they've heard people say, look, I am neither male nor female. Well, that's a social construct. It's not an observable fact.
So if we boil it back to the fundamentals, we as humans are part of the animal kingdom. And as part of the animal kingdom, I'm seeing you pulling a face. You'll have a word in a moment.
Yes.
Every other animal in the animal kingdom comes in a male or a female format, as do we. Now, anything else we've decided to construct outside of there is what we've done as human beings. You don't see bears saying, "Hey, hang on a minute, I'm intersex. I'm intersex
plus bear."
Right. Yeah, that's right.
No.
So these are the fundamentals of things, and people shouldn't be afraid or offended of the fundamentals.
Absolutely not, and yet you must also be respectful. If someone comes to you and says, "I don't see myself as male or female. I see myself as intersex. I am a bit of both, plus the Q plus note." Well, you don't be rude to that. Just say, "Well, I don't fully understand it, and I don't adhere to your belief."
Correct. We can agree to disagree.
Yeah, we can. And unfortunately, because we've never been taught these forms of dissertation, argumentation, that Plato, Aristotle and Socrates did, we get caught up in my truth, your truth. No.
Belief and truth. And that's an interesting definition, as we discovered last week.
We have advanced, and I think there's nothing to be slammed in saying, all right, well, if you believe there are 72 genders, I'm not in a position, and I'm not going to become heated or say you're a fool. I have no right to do that. As you say so many times, Colin, all I can say to that is I don't agree with you.
Sure.
And so this is what this form of these three philosophers gave to mankind in terms of argumentation, in terms of oral dissertation, because, as they all said, who knows the real truth? Who knows?
That's correct.
We don't. Correct. So then Plato had four areas: the theory of forms, knowledge and truth, the soul and the good life, and political philosophy. Now, in forms, Plato posits that reality consists of eternal, unchanging entities known as forms. Now, he might say the sun rising every day and going down every day, and it's done that. He would probably address that's a form. It's an eternal truth. There's no way. And in law today, a judge is entitled, and barristers will put it, there are certain things that are evidentially unarguable, and that is that there's 12 hours of light, 12 hours of dark.
Fire is hot, fire burns.
Yeah.
These are absolute.
These are forms, and he says, which are the true nature of things. The material world that we perceive around us, he says, is merely a shadow of these forms. Can you think of a shadow of those forms?
Look, we all
I've never put my hand in a cold fire.
No, but
I have. Those sparklers you used to have on bonfire night.
I think to myself that every person, no matter where you are in the world, what race, colour, creed, will experience these things the same way. The sun will rise in the morning. It will set in the evening. I put my hand in a fire, I will burn my hand. If I hold my hand near a fire, it will be hot.
Yes, I think you're spot on with that. And so those things to him are forms, eternal truths that really
are inarguable.
And this is where, when we were speaking just a few minutes ago about genders. Now, there are some who say, well, an eternal truth is there is male and female. You can observe it in the animal kingdom. You can observe it everywhere. I raised my eyes when you said we are an animal. You're probably not wrong with that, but we have something that I've never observed an animal do.
Sure.
We have the ability to reason and to use intellect. But who can understand an albatross? that flies for 60 hours, never landing, and cruises across the oceans. And it sleeps in the air, and yet it knows where it's going, and it gets there. And anyone who's had an animal, a pet, and I used to observe this with my horses when I was a child and older, I could just saddle up a horse and I might have been 60 miles away. And it was a new path we had followed to get where we were and camping. And I'd just saddle up and give that horse a head and it would bring me back home.
Sure.
Now, how did it do that? They must have some system that we don't know of yet of navigational skill. And you think of the swallow. I have swallows over my lake in Robina, and they migrate from China every year. Now, how does that little bird with those little wings get up in the slipstream and navigate from China through Southeast Asia, over the land, the sea, and arrive in Robina every year to breed?
Actually, I was some years ago, and I've forgotten the name of the bird, but it was a study of a bird in the United States, and it nested at a certain time of year. But what they'd found out in studying this bird in hindsight was that if it was going to be a very bad hurricane season, right, and again, you can't tell this beforehand until the hurricanes have come through, they would nest early. So somehow they knew that it was actually going to be a bad hurricane season. They were working through the mechanisms and what it was that this small bird knew more than what we do.
And something that's known to most people, it's heart-wrenching. And I remember reading the story when I was in my teenage years of a cattle dog that had been lost in Melbourne, and yet the farmer and the had come from Perth. And it took 3 years, but that dog navigated its way out of Victoria, across South Australia, across the Nullarbor, into Western Australia, and then up north of Fremantle and turned up on the property one day. Wow. Now imagine the heartbreak when you saw your old Fido at the gate, sitting there, tail wagging, tongue out, and you'd said, I haven't seen you for 3 years. I thought I lost you at cattle sales in Melbourne. And you could almost hear the dog saying, yeah, I thought I had too, but I knew I had to come home. Now, how did that dog know to navigate through Victoria from Melbourne out to the west? And so these are what Plato would call eternal truths. They are material and yet they are factual, and we don't understand them.
Yes,
absolutely. And that's why he speaks of them as eternal forms. And then he looks at knowledge and truth. He argues that knowledge is not derived from sensory experience, but from reason and understanding of the forms. This leads to a distinction between an opinion and knowledge, where knowledge is more profound and meaningful. Now, we just used the example of that dog, and we're talking about, well, how did that dog do it? Well, it's not an opinion. The fact the dog did it. Yes. Those albatross navigate and stay in the air for weeks and don't land. They'll go down to get fish out of the Atlantic Ocean or wherever, and then back up and riding, I take it, the therms, the movement of air across the Atlantic or the Pacific. So knowledge and truth is totally material. It's true or it's not true.
Sure.
And our knowledge around it leads us to declare it as truth. Someone else might say, no, it's rubbish. But according to Plato, rubbish or true, it's the truth. And it's the mind has to identify it as a form that can't be argued about, against, or whatever, because it exists independently as a statement of factual truth, or as a being of factual truth. So that was his second point. His third point was the soul and the good life. Now, Plato's ethical philosophy emphasized the importance of virtue and a good life, suggesting that the soul's journey towards the good is essential for moral development. Now, who's going to argue against that? I've never met someone who said, no, I believe in murdering, I believe in evil and lying. Because anyone who would say that, you'd be calling a psychiatrist. I think we better treat this person. So Plato just acknowledges, one, something that is abstract, can't be seen materially,
Sure.
the soul. Now, it's from that view that, Plato believed in God, but he did not believe in the Christian God or the religious God. He believed that God was the cause of everything, was the first cause, as it was called, and from it sprung everything. So he looked at the soul and said, well, it's not material, I can't see it, I can't touch it, but it's there.
Yes.
And he said, and he backed up his argument, it's there because I've witnessed, as we all have witnessed, the soul's doings. And they're either good or they're either bad. So he said this is essential for moral development. Now, I'm on a bit of a roll here, so I'll just do the last one, then we can spend the rest of what we've got just further discussing it. He believed, of course, in political philosophy in his dialogues. Plato explored the ideal state, advocating for a philosopher, what the others were doing, Socrates, Aristotle. And he says they were the type of people who governed justly and promoted, a king, he said, who governs justly and promotes the well-being of society was, according to him, his idea, to continue to influence contemporary discussions in metaphysics, in ethics, in politics, making that person a foundational figure in Western philosophy, and back to how we started this, making them foundational figures in the development of Western democracy. And no amount of unlearned, left-wing Islamic thinking can take away that depth that three Greek men really promoted 2,500 years ago. And if it can be toppled with communism or Fabianism, then there was no weight to it. Yet, here we are discussing it 2,500 years later.
Absolutely. And that's the bit that I always sit back with wonder on, is that these people who set the foundations weren't found out to be wrong with all of our technology and thinking and loftier educational platforms. These are the foundations of who and what we are today. And their thinking was well and truly, I won't say above who and what we are today.
No, it's not. Well, look, any human, you touched on it, any human can do this, whether he's an uneducated grave digger,
yes,
or he's a highfalutin professor of some art in a university.
Albert Einstein.
Yeah, because we all, according to these three men, we have a soul.
Correct.
And that soul can't be touched, can't be seen, but does know. It's called, and there were a group called the Gnostics, the Gnostic, and they were banned in Christianity as being dangerous in about the 400s. But the Gnostics argued, well, we can know God because we are God.
Okay.
Yep, go.
We've got about a minute to go,
All right.
David, so we might round up and
Yes.
talk about what we're going to explore next week.
Well, I think we'll go further into these type
I
of
agree.
things.
Yeah,
you know.
we've defined it this show
Yeah.
as to what he contributed, and so we'll dive into each one of those topics next week.
But yes, and realising what a brain and a mind, or we'll say a mind, forget brain, because we don't know where the thinking comes from. You can open up a brain and look at it, and it's a soggy mess.
Look, I often found that a lot of my opinions came out through discussions at university. There would be 14 or 15 people in a room. We'd all be talking about a topic. So-and-so would throw this into the ring. You'd throw that into the ring. And slowly but surely, you would twist and poke and prod a problem or an idea and come out the other end with a better view of the solution or what you were dealing with.
And how spoilt we were being at the tertiary, the third stage of education, where it was okay. But I've known stockmen who never went past grade 6 and worked on our family's properties, and you'd be out riding, they'd be taken when we were children, and say, well, come with me, we're going to go and bring the far north paddock mob in and put them in the centre paddock. And you'd be riding along beside him, and he would start speaking. And you wouldn't expect a conversation like this from a drinking, uneducated, because I used to see them drunk. But when questions such as, I remember one looking at the trees and the birds, and we stopped by a billabong, and Warwick said, "What does this say to you, Dave?" And Peter, my cousin, "What? Well, what are you talking about?" And he said, "If you listen carefully, these trees, these ghost gums, the kookaburras in them, the snakes that we can't see but are here, and the water in the billabong, it speaks, it has a voice." Now, I was 11, and I didn't think he was mad, but I remember thinking, oh gosh, I don't know. But as I got older and did what you just said, sitting in rooms, tutorial rooms with other students and tossing up and down, thinking, I thought, old Warwick, he was smart.
David Ashton Lewis, we'll leave it there. We will be back to join the discussion once again next Thursday at 10 o'clock.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and thank you, listener. As long as you like this discussion, we're happy to bring it to you.
You've been listening to 4CRB's interviews and talkback series. Support local online content and become a financial supporter today at 4CRB.com.